The reasons why the Australian people want a Royal Commission is the very reason why the banks don't.
No, we're not having a banking Royal Commission.
It should not be about going to our government and simply asking for a Royal Commission. It should be the people's right to demand one.
No, we're not having a banking Royal Commission.
A parliament is not acting in the best interest of the Australian people if it doesn't listen. A Royal Commission or a reconstituted grand jury is inevitable, and it will happen.
There is not going to be a banking Royal Commission.
But there will be a Royal Commission. I mean, Malcom Turnbull will call a Royal Commission, and if he doesn't, we'll go around him and go for a grand jury or go straight to the top.
On for years, it will cost hundreds of millions of dollars.
I mean, everyone in Australia wants a Royal Commission.
No, we're not having a banking Royal Commission.
And undermining, Mr Speaker, an institution that is critical to our economy.
It will go on for years, it will cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and it will not tell us anything new.
Well, I'd like to remind people out there, these banks are the biggest destroyers of good, hard-working Australian assets, and that's why I went to the 45th Parliament and stood up and was right behind the Royal Commission. I never took my eyes off the Royal Commission, despite my former party leader Pauline Hanson turning her back, along with my other members, onto the Royal Commission at the first meeting with Malcom Turnbull. I wrote the terms and reference for the Royal Commission to go into Malcom Turnbull for his consideration. However, he had always the executive power. So, it was always his call.
There's not going to be a banking Royal Commission.
And Malcom Turnbull, if he ignores it now, and this evidence will go through to him as well, no one is above the law, and with what he's got in his lap would be, I believe, aiding and abetting these banks. He's got to let this Royal Commission run.
A lawyer's picnic for 3 years costing $150 million is not going to get an answer for anyone.
A Royal Commission cannot be ignored by Malcom Turnbull because parts of this are civil and parts are very much criminal, and they jailed the bankers in Japan and they jailed the bankers in Iceland.
For their part, the government was today sending a message to the top end of town, vowing tougher penalties for corporations and their employees caught doing the wrong thing.
Malcom Turnbull and Scott Morrison insisted they were fixing the problems, beefing up budgets and powers for regulators.
You're my favourite deputy. You got a friend in me.
And it will not tell us anything new.
People's lives have been destroyed, and it prompted a Senate inquiry.
Some of the evidence I've seen, clearly forgery and fraud were involved.
Signatures forged as a result. Growers have in excess of $15 million worth of cattle removed from the property, and not 1 cent has gone off their debt to the bank, and yet they're still paying the loans.
Out of that Senate inquiry a year later was a finding that our regulator had really dropped the ball.
No, we're not having a banking Royal Commission.
We have also been able to withstand the full assault of receivers, openly threatening farm owners, supported by multiple armed police officers and SWAT teams who held us at gunpoint as they came to the properties to evict us as farmers.
The government agreed to a Senate inquiry into the life insurance sector, but it still refused point blank to have a Royal Commission.
No, we're not having a banking Royal Commission.
During the last week banking inquiry held by Mr Turnbull, which we all call the banker's belly scratch, I was sent a note from a lady who was fighting with Rabobank. It was a suicide letter because after watching the news on the pathetic inquiry, she had given up all hope.
There's not going to be a banking Royal Commission.
If I had a choice of being publicly disgraced by the media or removing a loaded gun away from a boy's hand, I'd choose the first option again and again. I'd rather be humiliated than risk losing another life.
A lawyer's picnic for 3 years costing $150 million is not going to get an answer for anyone.
It is this arrogance that is pushing people over the edge. And I've also spoken to a number of people wanting to take their own lives. A grower watching this speech up here right now in the public gallery tried to end it all by tipping 20 litres of petrol on himself and walked into an open fire. He was in a coma for 6 months, all because of the ANZ Bank.
I've said before how sorry I am for the pain that we've caused.
Roland Andrew Davis better known as the toe cutter at ANZ, stated that only way growers could get a payout figure was to sign a new ANZ Bank letter of offer, a formality of switching from green to blue, and all terms and conditions would remain unchanged until your next review. The majority of farmers just simply signed over to the ANZ Bank, and before the ink was dry, they were forced to pay up sums of up to $6 million within weeks.
Bosses were hauled to Canberra and publicly flayed.
I've said before how sorry I am for the pain that we've caused them.
I have apologised and do so again.
And for that I apologise.
And we apologise for this.
See that the ANZ Bank receiver's agent were clearly caught on camera in the kitchen of Bruce Dixon's farm, saying, "We're not here to head bash you. We can get the tactical response group to remove you farmers."
We've let you down where we haven't met that standard. And I'm sorry for that.
So while the bankers were saying sorry, I say sorry doesn't cut it.
There is not going to be a banking royal commission.
Malcom Turnbull is not going to have another bloody fancy bullshit bloody Senate inquiry. He needs to call the Royal Commission now because people need restitution. The ANZ Bank has been caught up in all sorts of scandals overseas, and now it's happening in our own shores. So Malcom Turnbull, wake up. This is going to happen, and these guys need to go to jail. Restitution will come.
There's not going to be a banking royal commission.
We know that Whitlam put the Constitution in the drawer since 1973, so I took the two-prong approach to put the Queen back into the High Court, which they did. They amended the rules, and as you can go on the website now, and the High Court comes out and says, "God save the Queen," which is beautiful. And I needed to put the Queen back in so that the Prime Minister could call a Royal Commission, because if you've got no Queen that's recognised in any jurisdiction around Australia, well then how can you have a Royal Commission?
Go on for years. It will cost hundreds of millions of dollars.
ANZ Bank and other major banks, including Rabo, have clearly performed financial terrorism on the people of this country, and they will be held to account. A Royal Commission or a grand jury will happen.
He gave in.
The only way we can give all Australians a greater degree of assurance about the financial system is through a Royal Commission into misconduct into the financial services industry.
So the genie is out of the bottle.
Our banks have failed in many ways. Failed customers, failed to obey the law, and failed to meet community standards. Australians have every right to expect the world's best banks. It is clear today that as an industry we have failed to deliver that. Make no mistake, today is a day of shame for Australia's banks.
ASIC has been an ineffective regulator, and that's been the case for 20 years or more. The banks do not have a fear of ASIC. It is a manageable institution from their point of view.
They've relied on ASIC as the most useless watchdog on the planet, to be honest. Do nothing. They're just a toothless tiger and defunct.
What we're seeing is corporate greed play out.
Commonwealth Bank whistleblower Jeff Morris saw from the inside just how far the banks would go. He says banking regulators have been asleep at the wheel.
If you had one institution doing this, that's a banking scandal. When it's the whole sector, that's a failure of regulation and a failure of government.
And yet the scandals kept growing.
Commonwealth Bank now stands accused of nearly 54,000 breaches of its
Commonwealth
reporting.
CEO Ian Narev is embroiled in another crisis.
Commonwealth does everything it can to avoid paying. We had a National Australia Bank financial planning scandal. We had Macquarie and the Penske file.
Meanwhile, I'll get you the Penske file. You can start working on that.
Yes, of course, the Penske file.
Filled with sickening evidence at the Royal Commission. And that led to the boss of AMP quitting in disgrace this morning over the despicable actions of his company.
Fees charged for services never provided, dead clients hit with still more fees, and, most damning, AMP's admission it deliberately and repeatedly lied to the Australian Securities and Investments Commission.
He deliberately withheld information from corporate cop ASIC to avoid poor publicity.
It seems very simple, Mr. Haggar. You made a decision that you were not going to tell ASIC about the amount of compensation.
No, that's not true, Mr. Hodge. Well, if that's your simple question, no.
I deny that.
I deny that. And I could not have opened the door any wider, Mr. Hodge.
So being open and transparent
was accomplished by saying, ask us what you like, but we won't tell you what to ask.
Misleading ASIC carries heavy civil and criminal penalties, including up to 12 months jail for any officials that are involved. Today, the NAB denied any allegation that it misled ASIC, but already this Royal Commission has heard recommendations that the Commonwealth Bank and AMP should have charges against them.
There have to be radical change. Just increasing the fines and resourcing ASIC more is not enough.
They jailed the bankers in Japan and they jailed the bankers in Iceland.
And these guys need to go to jail.
And for all the farmers, I said I'd come here and when I made it and simply say, and may we say, God save the Queen, because nothing will save these bankers. Thank you.
Authorised by Ian Nelson for the Great Australian Party, PO Box 8242, South Perth 6151, Western Australia.